So welcome back, PHSNE, from our summer break. This is our first presentation since June. So welcome back to the monthly meetings. I'm Dana G. I'm the program coordinator for PHSNE. And I just have a few housekeeping announcements before our speaker, Brian Taylor, gets started. The active screen is being recorded for YouTube. You probably saw that when you signed in. And please stay muted during the presentation. And what we'll do is, if you have questions, please type them into the chat screen addressed to everyone so we can all see it. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll do Q&A and I'll relay the questions to Brian, or you can ask them on your own. Let's see, if you have any technical difficulties, you can also type that into the chat and we'll do our best to help you. And at the top right of the screen is the view icon, and speaker is best for the presentation, during the presentation. Gallery, you can see everyone, but speaker is best for seeing the screen, full size. So let me introduce our speaker. Brian Taylor is a renowned contemporary photographer, professor, and gallery director. Beginning as a young disciple of Ansel Adams, Brian eventually discovered his own voice. His innovative artworks reveal his explorations of alternative photographic processes, including historic 19th century printing techniques, combining photography with mixed media and handmade books. His work has been exhibited nationally and abroad in numerous solo and group shows. He is the recipient of many prestigious grants, and his work has been widely published. Brian taught as a professor of photography at California State University, San Jose for 40 years and served as the chair of the Department of Art and Art History. In 2017, he created a public art piece commissioned by Redwood City, California, a 6-foot-tall photo sculptural book with 20 pages forming 10 open spread diptychs. After university teaching, Brian served as the executive director of the Center for Photographic Art, founded in Carmel, California by Ansel Adams, from 2015 to 2019. Now gleefully back in his darkroom and studio, Brian continues to lecture and teach workshops for arts organizations across the country, from Stanford University in California to the Penland School of Craft in North Carolina. And with that, Brian, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Dana. Could we please forward my honorarium to her? What a wonder! I love the stories you tell. Really, I could listen all day. But it's an honor for me to be here, and I really thank Dana and Ben and Rick and John Felix and Sid and all of you wonderful members that are here with me today, and not at a Patriots game. I'll try and keep this fast-paced and hopefully without a dull moment. I will start screen sharing if that sounds good. Okay. Well, I'm super honored to talk to the Photographic Historical Society of New England. What a prestigious title you have. And I will be happy to tell you a little history about my work. And as a matter of fact, I might even start off with my great respect and my love for historians. These are two people that were super influential in my life. I'm lucky enough to have crossed paths with both of these people in my younger days. These are well-known people to all of you historians for sure. I went to the University of New Mexico and had a wonderful 3 years listening to Beaumont Newhall tell the history of photography, the only guy who can do it without notes. And when he discussed anything to do with the 20th century, he practically was there. What a treat it was for him to show an Edward Weston nautilus shell or an Ansel Adams aspen grove, and Beaumont would just pace up on the stage with his hands behind his back, and he'd say, Ansel and I were there that day having a picnic by the river, and he saw these aspen trees. So it was such a treat. And they're both sitting in a gallery that this guy founded back in 1967. It was founded as the Friends of Photography, this sacred space in a gallery in downtown Carmel, which still exists, even though the Friends went off to San Francisco and kind of sort of self-destructed, unfortunately. But now we are the Center for Photographic Art. Anyway, I had a chance to spend a day with Ansel Adams when I was a freshman in college in Los Angeles at Occidental College. They flew Ansel in not for anything photographic related, but because of his great environmental causes. They gave him an honorary doctorate degree, and they knew that this young freshman was eating, sleeping, and breathing photography. Even though I entered school as a pre-med major, it took me that first year to discover that I just really wanted to be a photographer. So this is my cherished note giving me a check to cover taking Ansel to the LA airport. I think it was a $4 check that I would never dare cash, that's for sure. By the time we got to the airport, Ansel was ready to just jump out of the car because I spent the whole trip telling him about his history. But my real mentor in the beginning was Oliver Gagliani, who never was as famous as Ansel or Brett Weston, but he really knew the zone system. So these are my first roots. This is Oliver and I bashing around the desert Southwest in ghost towns, photographing together. And both Oliver and I were really influenced by a New Englander named Minor White, who, as you all know, reminded us, to photograph things for what they are and also what else they are. So that has always colored my view of the world. I've never quite been happy with a straight photograph, unfortunately for me. But in my early days, I was looking around a 5x7 Deerdorf, just like my coach Oliver did, making straight black and white photographs in the early days. Then I went off to grad school and ran into the likes of people like Betty Hahn, who was another East Coast amazing woman, still alive and well. But she and B. Nettles and others, as you know, are some of the pioneers of at least 20th century alternative processes. They took 19th century processes like cyanotypes and gum printing and brought them into the 20th century. Robert Fichter and some others, more in your part of the world than the West Coast. So when I went off to UNM, I was so influenced by Betty Hahn, and I still have such a great fondness for her. But she took me away from the zone system and West Coast photography, really strict zone system photography, and into the realm that still fascinates me to this day. This is a gum bichromate print over a cyanotype with torn edges. This is the Sonora Desert in southern Arizona. I was born in Tucson. And this is the desert where, if any of you are Carlos Castaneda readers from way back, this is the Sonora Desert where Carlos would walk and talk to coyotes. And of course, he had a little help from the peyote that he took, but I still would love to walk with any of you in this desert, and I dare you to not feel like it's possible that a coyote might come up and fall into step with us, especially at nightfall. And so I've tried not to poison myself along the way, but I've had my hands in many, many voodoo potions. But again, in the Southwest, this is Chaco Canyon, which certainly, as you know, is in New Mexico. And this is in the 1970s, when you could go there without so many tourists. And this is certainly a magical place. It still certainly has an aura of Native Americans dancing in these kivas who firmly believed that their dancing kept the world turning, and nobody wanted to stop them from dancing and question that in those days. And of course, tribes are still dancing to this day. And my respect for these magical places went beyond the Southwest American desert. You certainly recognize this place, which many people feel a real kind of ground zero energy from. So I'm just showing you these 4 pictures from this series to give you an idea of how I really stepped away from the zone system and the belief in treating it as a precious object, the gelatin silver print. These are now gum prints on watercolor paper and cyanotypes, and scratches with an X-Acto knife, watercolor spattered into the sky. I would wipe chalk pastels on my fingers and even dab them into the sky. If you had a better look at this, you'd actually see my fingerprints in the skies here. So I photographed handmade structures like these stones at Stonehenge, hand hewn, hand carried, inexplicably. And in order to portray these scenes, I really felt it would imbue the scene with even more magic if the scene were if my photograph was handmade as well. And I do believe in this digital age that artwork made by hand, especially still handmade photographs, even if they're silver prints that you picked up, you shouldn't with your fingers, but maybe with your tongs and moved it from the developer, the stop bath, and the fixer, just that act of touching artwork, I still, in my old-fashioned opinion, imbues the artwork with kind of an aura. And the aura is, it retains the touch of the maker. Now, postmodernism and these modern times would really poo-poo this romantic notion of auras. And you feel free to think I'm crazy, but it is a wonderfully romantic notion that something made by hands, sculpted by hands, wood carved by hands, penned by a hand, carries a touch of the creator. And carrying on with my love of handmade processes and my penchant for being a glutton for punishment, I really fell in love with gum printing, multiple run gum prints. If I can talk you out of this in any way, please send me an email and I'll talk you down off the ledge. But if you really have a lot of free time in your life and you enjoy pain, then you can also email me for information on gum printing, along with the many great books that are out there about it. I had some funny belief, I hope I can quote myself correctly here, that artists are the kind of people who find that typical pain and anguish just aren't enough. So we take up these 19th century processes. But I'll give you a little background on the technique, because I know some of you love history and technical history. So these are all 3 or 4 colored gum prints, about 20 by 24 inches on Fabriano cold press watercolor paper. And each of them starts out as a cyanotype, but I love cyanotypes, but for this series, I never really had a vision of presenting these as blue images. So they start as cyanotypes, but by the time I get done, as you'll see in this step-by-step process, they don't show their blueness, but it's really imperative that the cyanotype is down there. It really helps the depth of the shadows. So these begin as a cyanotype, and you can see registration marks here, little marks, little photograms in the margins on both sides. I have those marks on the big negative. I use one negative for all of these, and I use the same negative for different colors and different exposures. Please let me know if any of this technical stuff is boring. I know I have a limited time, and then we'll have time for question and answers too, which I very much welcome. But on top of the cyanotype, I use gouache too, by the way, instead of watercolor. Gouache is more opaque for you gum printers out there. So now I'm beginning to cover up the blue, but I do sort of want to have these imperfections to let you know that there is a cyanotype underneath. So I'll purposely not completely cover up the cyanotype, maybe in my corners. So step by step, making a cyanotype, processing it, letting the paper dry for a few hours, then brushing on colored light sensitive emulsion, Arabic with potassium dichromate, and then a squish of any color you want. That's probably the attraction for gum printing. It's probably what lures anybody to take on such a finicky process, is that at least this is one of the few photo processes that lets you make an image in any color you want. So here's kind of an olive green Winsor Newton gouache. Then I'll contact print that with a big negative in sunlight for maybe 10 minutes. bring it back in, let it soak in a tray. All the unexposed emulsion floats off, and the green sticks to the cyanotype. In this case, I've now processed the green over the cyanotype. Now we're on our third run, and I'll take a brush and I'll selectively apply sepia brown on top of the branches. Not so much on the green foliage in the rear, but selectively brushing on the light sensitive emulsion brown onto the green with imperfections. If you really look closely, you can see it was hard for me to keep my brush marks in line. This is all under yellow safe light, but gum printing is so insensitive to light, requiring direct sunlight for 10 minutes, that fortunately you can screw in a regular GE insect light, a yellow light, like 100 watt. You can light up your darkroom like Grand Central Station. You do not have to use black and white photo amber safe lights. So there's plenty of light. Then out in the sun goes the brown exposure. And then for my final exposure, lamp black. Again, I coat the whole thing with lamp black, which all of this requires offerings to the gods and prayers, because I'm using gouache again. So this lamp black completely opaques out all of my work. Everything I've done is now pitch black, opaque black with lamp black, which gets its name from using soot, coal soot from lamps in the 19th century. But I'm not totally nuts. I did not opaque out my registration marks. I put masking tape over my registration marks on both sides to show me my original photogram. Remember, I'm using the same negative each time. So even though I blackened out my image, I can still see my registration marks. So I can put my negative back into exact placement. You know, when I'm really on, grain falls on top of grain. I mean, each dot of grain falls back on itself, which brings up the gum printing nightmare of shrinkage, paper shrinkage, if that rings a bell with any of you. You know, I won't even go there. We'll keep going. I'll give you the illusion that this is fun to do. But when all goes well, you have a gum print that has four different areas of color, black for the shadows, not black in the highlights, the green is visible, brown in some branches. And again, I know I'm going a mile a minute, but if you're wondering how you can use one negative and get areas of four different color, I'll just give you something to ponder tonight as you're going to sleep. Different exposure times. Different exposure times allows the sun to go through different parts of the negative and harden that color, that exposure layer. I know that's cryptic. I'll give you one example. You don't want black. Black is your final run. You don't want black covering up your green. So the green exposure would be maybe 12 minutes, which gives the sun 12 minutes to go through almost all parts of your negative, the dense parts of your negative, which are your highlights. I know, pardon me, but the black does not cover the green. The black just covers the shadows because you coated it with black at the very end, and you give that only 3 minutes for the sun to blast its way through your negative. So you don't give it very much time. The sun can get through the clear parts of your negatives in 3 minutes, which are your shadows. And so you didn't give black enough time to attach itself to the highlight areas. There will be a quiz on this later. I still have a little professor in me. All of this requires pre-shrinking the paper ahead of time, get all the shrinkage out of it so you don't get any shifting in between exposures. And the fun part, beyond poisoning yourself in serious toxic stuff like dichromate, the fun part is you get to mix up exactly the colors you want. Here's my sepia gouache, and here's my lamp black. And you're using very soft hake, H-A-K-E, Asian brushes that have rabbit fur or goat fur. One of my terrible jokes, and this is only the first, is that somewhere there's a very chilly rabbit out there, having been shaved for the sake of this brush. And again, one of the attractions of gun printing is whatever colors you can squish out of a tube, and even beyond that, any colors you can create by intermixing colors from a tube can appear in your photograph. You know, platinum printing is fabulous, but you pretty much get that beautiful soft brown from platinum prints, etc. Cyanotypes are generally blue, not counting toning, but gun prints do allow you to make color prints. So contact printing is a big part of this. This is a contact printing frame in Penland, where I sometimes teach these workshops. Such a wonderful place back in North Carolina, as many of you know, such a fabulous craft school. Here's my decrepit darkroom, which would win an award for America's worst darkroom. I'm very proud of that. But if it works, it works, as you all know, in your own darkrooms. So here's an example of building an image on top of what started out as a cyanotype. This I just wanted to show you because you can see my margins out here. I'll use press-on, Letraset press-on type. You can't even buy it anymore because the computer killed off rub-down type. But if you can ever find sheets of rub-down black letters, they are fantastic to rub down on your negatives to give you these registration marks. Of course, Photoshop has printers bullseyes digitally, but I'm sorry to set your hair on fire with all this technical stuff. Just wanted to show you this because I'm certainly not going to let you see my margins when I come down the home stretch. So here's that same kind of print where I've deckled edge. I've used a straight edge and torn edges to remove those margins, get rid of my registration marks. But as I mentioned, I want a little bit of credit for my cyanotype first run, so I do let my brush marks from my gum emulsions skip in certain areas and let you see the cyanotype underneath. This raises another one of my great beliefs in my own work, and I know some of you are extremely meticulous, so you don't have to follow this, but I love imperfections. In today's digital world of Command P, and you can get exactly the same print by hitting Command P again, I love imperfections by the human hand. And here you see my brush marks, which no print could ever be the same. You know, my brush marks would never fall in the same place. My black pigment, you know, mistakes where I dragged my lamp black undissolved pigment across the watercolor paper would never happen again in the same place. And all's fair in love and war and art. You know, if your paper is a little bit stained, and that happens with gum printing, all's fair. I won't tell you how I got my highlights back, but unfortunately, you've seen this picture. Wiser people than I, better artists than I, have come to this conclusion long ago. This is some of the best advice you'll ever get in your life from the one and only Man Ray in the 1920s. A certain amount of contempt for the materials you're using to express an idea is indispensable to the fullest realization of the idea. Absolutely true. Let's put it another way. If you are intimidated by your process, you will not make your best work because you'll be controlled. You won't have the courage. You won't have the courage to fail, and you have to fail. You've got to overstep the perfect point in order to find out where that is. And then you do it again. You spend another $20 on your platinum print and get it right this time. This is why the perfect test strip starts out erroneously light and in 5-second increments goes all the way to unacceptably black. We do that, we overstep the boundaries to find out where the sweet spot is. Good advice by Man Ray. I love handmade books. I love the book format. From here on, I'm going to show you lots of things about handmade books. I'm checking my timeline. I got about 15 minutes here. Born in Tucson, I love the desert. Here's a gum print. Again, this is the inside page of a book and I'll show you some of the inside pages. When I display my books, they're in shadow box frames behind plexiglass to an open spread. So this is actually an open book in about a 3-foot long shadow box frame. And book lovers hate me. They say I'm entombing my books. And so I love to say, feel free to purchase this print, take it home, pull the back off the frame, and you can see the underlying pages. I've never heard anybody take me up on that, either the purchasing or the popping the back off. But just so you can see, there are underlying pages, many of which kind of gave their lives for the open spread. Another big multiple run gum print. Parenthood entered my life, and many artists would say destroyed my art career, but I decided to just bring my camera with me on these many expeditions that I took my wild sons on. So here's some wonderful teepee that was built, and I'm afraid most everything my sons left is not standing anymore. My memoir from those days will be called, I kid you not, Everything I Own is Broken, including my beautiful Edward Weston nude #1, that beautiful soft focus nude, which I have on my wall. If it was printed by Edward, it'd be like $3 million, but it was printed by Cole, as many of you know. So I picked that up for a mere $150 when the getting was good. They're now worth about $15,000, until one son threw a tennis ball at the other son, knocking that print down off my wall, which was the moment I realized, why am I using glass, to frame these things? So it hit the ground, just shattered in glass. And about 3 hours later, when I had the courage to go and see what happened to Weston's nude #1, there wasn't a mark on it. And so the gods were just teaching me a lesson. So out here in California, my friends, especially with earthquakes, no joke, every gallery frames everything in Plex if it could fall off the wall. So I'll give you a few more images. And of course, you can see many of these and more on my website if you're interested, at briantaylorphotography.com. There are about 150 other Brian Taylors out there, so I'm not as lucky as many of you to just have my name as the website name. But here's another example why I love the open book format. It allows me to use text sometimes and insert the text as though these pages were torn out and these are just random words, which are not random words. Somewhere a man's shoes are wet. This is my friend out in San Francisco Bay, near the airport, with planes taking off. And my early zone system roots always show in my work. I try to be loose. I try to have skipped brush marks, and I try to tear pages. But anybody who was indoctrinated by Ansel and that West Coast crowd is born tight. I mean, if you gravitate towards that, you are born tight. And another belief of mine is that we're all born tight, or we're born loose. I got to come up with better words than that. But other words would be, we're born meticulous, and you people know exactly who you are. And the lucky ones are born forgiving. You're I hate to say looser, but you can accept your pencil going out the sun. You can accept that dust mark in your gelatin print, or the imperfect spotting job of that dust mark on your print. So I spend my life trying to look loose, but I will tell you that one very tight guy spent about 20 minutes meticulously tearing this to look like it was not meticulously torn. And here as well, our thoughts wander. I'm on a Boston subway, you Massachusetts friends. you know this look. We all get on a subway, and many people are daydreaming. Many people are rattling down the tunnel, but we're not there. So this is all about trying to photograph something that's kind of invisible, people's thoughts. Where is she? Where is she? Where is she? So, and I use my own photographs. So in my own negative files, the most peaceful photograph I think I've ever taken is one of the tall ships when they come to San Francisco under the Golden Gate Bridge. This is outside the bridge, looking out at the Pacific Ocean as the tall ships are arriving, and it was foggy. And to me, this is an extremely peaceful image. So this open book format allows me to marry a picture taken in a Boston subway with a picture taken in an open Pacific landscape, and make a marriage. And you hope it's a good marriage. And then the words are the fewest amount of words, almost like haiku, that I can use to get my idea across. Other times I'll use this open book spread to show you once on an underlying page. This is a beautiful little creek near Lake Tahoe. This is a creek that feeds into Lake Tahoe, and it has golden trout in the creek. This creek has a display, a ranger station with a walkway that goes down below ground, and there's plexiglass. And it's like an aquarium where they have some brown trout that you can see. And so this open book format allows me to show you a landscape of the creek, and then I tear the page meticulously to show you seemingly what looks like, just kind of a random underlying page, which happens to have the fish, in the water. These are all gelatin silver prints. And all of these things require making your aquarium scene the exact same shade of gray as the water was above ground, so that so the fish kind of seem plausible that they're in the stream, that they're below the surface. I do a lot of praying. Here's what an installation would look like. This is actually at the Center for Photographic Art in almost 30 years ago, 1995. So these are in shadow box frames, maybe 2-inch deep frames with Plex on the front. I also spend my life trying to find a way to get rid of plexiglass. All of you who frame your work in plexiglass know it's the bane of your existence. Try shipping that, why don't you? And getting it back unscratched. So I'm still looking for ways to use shelves on a gallery wall. I'll show you some installations where I do have unframed books, and I want to get back to that. The Good Wife. And for those of you who wonder if these are books, they really are books. This is my belief in auras again. I really feel you would know by looking at this book, even if you can't touch it, even if it's behind plexiglass. I really think it's much more authentic if it really does have pages, even though you can never see them. Robert Rauschenberg once made a sculpture. It was a box with something in it. It was an art object, and you could never find out what it was. So I kind of like the idea of giving you a hint that something's there, but not quite allowing you to see it. I love bookbinding. I am not a skilled bookbinder at all. My binding skills would give people a rash. Talk about a meticulous group, bookbinders. Those are tight people, my friends. And I dare to say that to some of you. If you're bookbinders, you know how to measure, you know how to do things very precisely. So these are some underlying pages from this book, The Good Wife. One of my sons is throwing a rubber fish up in the air when I took that picture. I wanted to include this because you're a photo historical group. I have some quizzes for you, by the way. Who am I thinking of in this picture? I'll wait. And this is time to unmute yourself. You can hit your space bar and shout out. All right, I'm putting $10 million out there. Who am I thinking of?
Man Ray.
Oh, that's excellent. I hadn't thought of that. Let's ask the judges. Oh,
Tina Modotti.
oh my God, that's an extra 5 million. You threw in the model's name. But I have to give credit to Man Ray. You're absolutely right. That's a great Man Ray pose. What would make it a Man Ray? If it were
Holes in the fiddle.
exactly.
Holes in the fiddle.
Yes, exactly right. You're absolutely right. Those F holes, perfect. Oh my God, I see who I'm messing with now. Or that solarized line, right?
Yep.
Oh my God. I'm backing off here with my photo. No, it's a joy to be with people who know their photo history. Well, I'm going to go, well, Tina Modotti, you get 15 million. And I was certainly thinking of Edward Weston, who took this picture of, well, this is my wife in a black wig, but my little hints are Tina's roses. I'll show you what I like to try and load my images with little value added little discoveries that you can make. I try to make interesting work, so if nobody knew this was about Edward Weston, you'd still like it. But for those of you who know who Tina is, or this note, "Goodbye, Edward," she left him. One of the women who left Edward. It's okay, he went and found another one, as you know. But this is where I kind of tried to embed little clues. Here's the man and one of his most magnificent models, Tina Modotti from Italy. We all think she's from Mexico, but she was an Italian actress, and the two of them, Edward left his first wife, Flora, and took off to Mexico in the 1920s with this super amazing woman. Truly, I don't need to tell you how amazing Tina Modotti was, especially through the lens of Edward Weston. Here is that famous Weston picture of Tina. And I tried to make my wife get into that pose, but she couldn't bend that far forward. Tina Modotti was, Edward always did incredible pictures of her. I don't need to tell you, but she was like maybe 5 feet tall. And so she could kind of get into positions that others taller women couldn't get into. Not to mention another little clue. Tina Modotti, Edward taught Tina how to make pictures. And there was a time when her images were selling for more than Edward Weston's images, long after they both died, like in the 60s. Tina sold this picture, her white roses, to Esprit, the clothing line, and it sold for a lot of money, and Edwards had never sold for that much. So she actually outsold him. So those are my little hints about Goodbye, Edward, Tina leaving, my attempt to do a Western nude. My wife is blonde, so we bought an inexpensive black brunette wig to try and look like Tina. Anyway, I won't go so long into each one. All right, who am I thinking of here? You know.
Andy Wyeth.
You're darn right. And this is my wife who worked at Apple at the time in Silicon Valley. So this is sort of like Christina updated. I'll pick up the tempo to allow you time for questions and a conversation. This is called Ant Farm. Remember when all of us were young, you could buy those thin plexiglass boxes and fill them with sand, and you could mail away for ants, and it was so thin you could see their little tunnels. So I would walk around San Francisco thinking all these people who would leave their windows open at night. It's sort of like a modern day ant farm. You can see what all of us little ants are doing behind there. So this says Ant Farm here. And these are all pictures taken through open windows back in the days when I wouldn't have gotten hauled off to jail for doing it. And this is an example of what these would look like, again, in another gallery show. Sometimes I'll do large scale things. And sometimes I'll show open books or folios that really don't have pages behind them, but sometimes I will foolishly try my hand at poetry. You can see some of my poems on my website if you're interested, but I went into poetry realizing full well that many great people, Ansel Adams, Edward Weston, spent their lives being great photographers. Although I shouldn't use those guys because they were both superb writers. But I realized that poetry is an entire lifetime. You know, Rilke never tried to be a great photographer. So I realize I'm crazy for going into poetry, but I'll do things. This is a pact with a stray dog. I won't take the time to read these for you. When I was running an art department, this was not the table we sat at, but lucky for me, I found this table that was all scratched up, probably from chairs being stacked on it. And so this was a poem about a faculty meeting deciding whether to give young professors tenure or not, and how tense that is. And my kids turned out okay, even though I would post them in strange places like pet cemeteries in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And we would go and I want a disclaimer, no animals were hurt or at least killed in the making of this photograph. This is called Changing Nature. I did ask a lot of them. I was certainly thinking of Sally Mann and what she put her kids through. And so here's my little young son, Wyatt, who's being eaten by mosquitoes at Lake Tahoe, posing for me back in the good old film days, which I still love. Although I hate to admit it, those darn iPhone 14s are spectacular, as many of you know. Shooting in RAW, it kills me, but that might be the only camera many people need. I hate to say it. You know, those of us who still are proud of our Leica or Hasselblads, you know, I don't want to believe that an iPhone can compete. But I would take my little sons out and we'd fondle mermaids whenever possible. This is where the land touches the sea. And I'll come down the home stretch here. Taking my kids out, learning how to make paper boats from curious George children's books. And just to show you, I'm an analog believer like many of you. There's my big fat Pentax 6x7. And here's the poison oak I discovered later. My boats would fall apart. I only got about one pass before they dissolve in the water, but luckily here's a black and white hand-colored picture that survived. I always wondered what if Pavlov's wife, you know, let the dogs out of the cages and spoiled them? You know, Pavlov famous for ringing a bell and realizing that made his dog salivate. So what if his wife ruined the whole experiment? So here's my patient wife again. Golf with Freud. I don't quite know what that means, but I knew that Freud felt if we dreamt about the ocean, it was a sexually related dream. So this is my hint of an underlying page there. And now really the thing that just consumes me now, I adore the idea of explorer sketchbooks. I was visiting Linda Connor up in San Francisco, who is a fantastic photographer, as many of you know, who was the queen of the San Francisco Art Institute in its day. This was just a book on her table, and I opened it and I bought it like 3 milliseconds later. A fantastic book of people who got access to Delacroix's sketchbook or other people. I won't take you through it. Lewis and Clark's sketchbooks on their expedition, unbelievable. No book has ever inspired me or influenced more than that book. And so I began to make pictures, and now I'm in the digital world, I will confess. It allows me to make prints on Moleskine paper and watercolor, those little Moleskine pages. The idea of talking with Carlos Castaneda's coyotes, what if they would walk up to you and have a conversation? Little tiny bit of changing reality here, I have to confess. But I walk in this park. This is out in Carmel Valley near my home, and I don't walk every day, but every time I go, I'm asking a coyote to come up and talk to me. I do a lot of testing, a lot of throwing away. Van Dyke prints, cyanotypes, silver gelatin prints, but digital prints allow me to print on watercolor paper. Here's opening up a book called Castaneda's Friends, where I'll write a little bit of a story about I'm walking with my dog, and I tell him that, Carlos Castaneda had friends. Coyotes would come up and talk to him. And my dog would say, yeah, I know those guys. There's a lot of suspension of disbelief in my books. So I told my dog Sigmund, he's a German Shepherd, so he's Sigmund, about Carlos Castaneda. And so Sigmund just took off and led me to a place where he and his pals meet Castaneda's friends. And we talk for a while, and then we all go our own ways. And then the last page in the book, is this cold tone and no stones. This is a couple months after I took the original picture of this ring that had stones placed in it. And it sort of is the end of the book, like, did that ever really happen? But anyway, I'm going over time. I'm going to zoom through this. This is on Cumberland Island and off of Georgia, as many of you know. And I saw the second story window. I would quiz you, but I won't take time to give away millions now. I saw the second story window, and I started thinking about a woman who wrote at her second story window. Okay, I'll give away $10 million. What woman am I thinking of who looked out her second story window and wrote all her poems on little tiny scraps of paper and put them in her desk drawer and was never famous in her lifetime?
Emily Dickinson.
Oh my God. Starting to get on my nerves here, costing me a lot of money hanging out with this brilliant crowd. So a group of us were staying there, and we all modeled for each other. So I grabbed somebody and said, would you get in a nightgown? We brought props. Fabulous people were there. People like Ted Orland were there, and Lori Verba in North Carolina, who's just a magnificent person. And so we took pictures for each other. So I made this into a cyanotype and made it into a book where one of these scraps of paper is kind of falling out of the book. Lori brought a stuffed fox, and these are called soft mounted. It was a real fox, but instead of being stiff, it's flexible. People fly into Cumberland in these little airplanes. Many of you probably been to Cumberland or those outer islands. I thought, anyway, if I were quizzing you, this is called Stickeen Beckons Me for a New Adventure. For $1 million, who was Stickeen? That's a tough one. I know that was a tough one. That was this guy's dog, John Muir's dog. So my dog, this is up in the Sierras where John Muir hung out. So a little bonus for anyone who, this is called Our Trusted Guide Leads Us to the Future. I don't know if you can quite see those wind turbines that I scratched into the print up there. Okay, I'm going to knock it off here. Audubon's Garden. This is a big print, maybe 3 feet wide, with little watercolored birds that I placed on there with a little space, maybe a 1/4 inch of a spacer to raise the birds off the mat, just to give it a little dimensionality. And these are those famous wild horses on Cumberland. If you go to Cumberland, you too will have this picture. This is watercolored pigment prints on watercolor paper. Okay, I'm going to leave you, and we can then chat together, but I'll leave you with better advice than my own. 3 different people from really serious to less serious. And I can't read this with my screen, but I hope you all can. The poor Zoom presenter never gets to see the audience or hear the raucous laughter from the humor. But this is Julie and Margaret Cameron, my favorite historians, telling us, when we feel bad in our work, it's because we've given judgment to other people. Unbelievable. Thank you, Julia Margaret Cameron. Unreal. And in fewer words, Henry Miller, we all know as a phenomenal 20th century writer, but not so many people knew that he also loved painting, watercolors especially. And talk about great advice. I should just leave you with this. Paint as you like and die happy. That is fantastic advice. But I have even happier advice from a great painter. Yes. The best advice we will ever get about life. Did you ever make mistakes in life? You can just hear him turning, right? With that hairdo. Let's make them birds. Yeah, they're birds now. You might have seen these words on t-shirts. This is fantastic advice. Okay, I shall stop talking and let all of you get a word in edgewise. Hopefully, you're not seeing my screen anymore.
No, we can see you, and Brian, that was fantastic.
Okay. I see 11 hate mail on the chat. Oh, I think I'm breaking up.
Everyone, let's unmute and give Brian a round of applause, and then we'll get some questions in.
I'm happy if you're happy to stay later.
Yeah.
I'm happy to go over time if you anyway.
Ben, are we okay to go a few minutes over if there are questions?
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
And that was
Okay.
really fantastic, Brian.
Okay, Dana,
Yeah, thank you,
may I
Brian.
start? With a
Yeah,
question?
sure. Go ahead, John.
Okay, Brian, I'm throwing down the gauntlet.
Oh boy.
Okay, I want to see what you're really made out of.
I hope it's not a photo history quiz because you guys are
Well,
tough.
okay, may I share a screen?
Yes.
Okay.
That's great. This is a bonus. Oh.
Okay,
Yeah.
right,
Yes.
keep going.
Unbelievable.
Who is this a cheap imitation of?
Oh, well, EW. Was
No.
it Edward Weston? Huh?
Not Edward Weston, no.
Oh, okay. All right. Was it a painter like not Cezanne or Modigliani or
No.
Okay, I give up. Who? Well, first of all,
Keep going. Let's keep going. You were on the wrong continent. That's a big hint.
oh, but maybe someone else can guess. What
Yeah.
what continent are we talking? What country? France.
France.
No. Not France.
No.
Well, Joseph Sodak?
No.
Okay. Okay, well, I don't want to take time.
Okay,
I
let's,
want the prize money. Can anybody guess it?
anybody?
Okay, John.
Okay, I'm sorry. There's one of those famous Zen paintings is Six Persimmons by Muki.
You're so right.
And so this is my cheap imitation, Five Tomatoes. The
I'm
Zen
sure-
part of the Zen part of it comes from rendering a red tomato in cyanotype and getting the tones.
I love it. Good one, John.
Out
I
of
think one would have aced it if there were 6 tomatoes there, you know. But
no,
the
no,
five-
out of all the people I've ever shown this to over the years, only one person immediately recognized it, and he taught English in Japan for 3 years.
Oh man, good one, John.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, I apologize for taking time, but thank you.
No, and you shot a view camera too, my friend. Good for you.
Yep.
Beautiful.
All right, I'm gonna stop share.
That was a bonus track. All right. Uh-oh. Oh, Dana, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I don't see any questions in the chat just yet, but I had a question. How does the way that you were taught differ from how you teach?
Oh, wow, that's such a great, well, I'll tell you what, I was taught, I'd say my major influence was Oliver Gagliani, who was fairly humorless and very strict and very meticulous, very, very meticulous. And if you don't know it by now, I will lighten up a little now and then. So I'm very happy to treat all of you as peers and welcome your thoughts equal to mine, and allow imperfection and allow for the fact that this pursuit of photography is a lifetime pursuit. So I think I'm not as tight as my teachers. And I kind of, all of you have taken workshops, I've taken workshops, and I think I prefer a looser teacher because I think they're having more fun. I feel like a super tight teacher is bound in a room of their own, a small room of their own making, maybe. My apologies to super meticulous engineers out there.
How did you learn gum printing?
From a very fun loose teacher, Betty Hahn, in grad school in 1976. And she was one of those pioneers. She certainly did not invent gum printing. Dimashi is famous for it in the 1890s, as you know, and he didn't invent gum printing either, but he's our pictorialist guy, as you historians know. But there was that gap between Dimashi in the 1890s, and then Stieglitz came along with his photo secession, as you know, and sort of put a lid on pictorialism for many, many decades until the 60s, when people like Betty Hahn came along and kind of rediscovered gum printing and reintroduced it to the world. And B. Nettles came out with that first little tiny paperback, a photo process cookbook or something. And did any of you go back those days? It's one of the very first photo technique textbooks. And now we have, Christopher James with this monumental book. I think his table of contents is 76 pages long. The table of contents. Christopher James, a New Englander with all of you. Anyway, Betty Hahn.
Thank you. Did someone have their hand up? I can't see everyone, so I guess when you're teaching students nowadays, do you find that people are really interested in learning processes that mix with each other, like combining gum with like a bookbinding experiment, like you have artists' books and things like that? When you teach, are you also incorporating those kind of concepts as far as how to present the material?
Beautiful, Dana. And I won't keep you all. I know we're past the point of no return, but that's such a great question. I want to give a couple different answers. One is, I spent many, many years teaching 24 students sitting quietly and respectfully in desks, half of them not wanting to be there, but they had to take this as requisite, but I always taught in any class, in any group, there's going to be 3 superstar students in varying ages. I often had people our ages there, 60s, 70s, sometimes 80s. And so I would teach to the best students and all the rest could come along for the ride. But I don't want to criticize academic teaching, but the point is really to complement workshops. Because when you teach a photo workshop or you take a workshop, everybody's there because they want to be there. And it's a fantastic vibe, as opposed to academia, which is a very mixed group. And then, so workshops are fabulous. And I thoroughly love teaching workshops of 10 or 12 people these days. And then, Dana, to answer your question about teaching more than one process or mixing, the title of the last workshop that I taught at Penland was called Photography in 3 Centuries. And so I would, over a 2-week period, we'd explore a 19th century process like cyanotype printing or gum printing, and actually taught both of those as 19th century processes. Then in the 20th century, we'd explore things like collage, which Picasso and Man Ray and others really made a valid art form, especially in Dada artwork, Duchamp. people ripping pieces of paper in the 19 teens and 20s. So we looked at photo montage and photo collage, and then and also the darkroom. I brought in silver printing, and then as a 21st century process, talk about a glutton for punishment for teaching. We turned to iPhones and digital printing. So we had 19th, 20th, and 21st century processes, which only made life unbelievably hard for the teacher. If some people signed up because they'd never printed in the darker before, like, wow. Anyway,
That's great.
I hope we all meet again. I don't know if you, one easy way to reach me is it's something memorable, easy to remember. Brian, BRIAN at photography.org, which is the Center for Photographic Arts website. And so I'm not the director anymore, but I retained that email address. So you can email me at brian at photography.org, not com, but .org, and happy to talk with you.
I'm
sorry.
just typing that into the chat. And we also posted your website as well so that people can contact you through there also.
Absolutely. That's a little harder. Whenever somebody contacts me through my website, I'll forward your email to my brain.
Okay.
So then when I reply, it's a much easier, more direct way to reach me.
Brian at photography.org.
Yeah.
Okay.
I hope to hear from you, because I'm sorry I didn't let you get a word in edgewise, but hopefully you got your money's worth.
Well, this has been fantastic. I'm so happy that we are having you join PHSNE as a member for at least a year. I hope you'll continue. We'll have this available in a few weeks on the YouTube channel. So if someone missed it, the link is shareable. Again, let's give Brian a round of applause.
Thank you all so much. And I wish you all the best with your own creativity and self-expression. You got to be you. Paint as you like and die happy.
Right.
All right.
We'll meet again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
See you again.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, David.
We'll have Vladimir Kazan in October on the 1st.
Okay.
Perfect. All right. We'll see Vlad in October. All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night, Dave.